For some, it's a clear example of when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches cold. Yes, a decision by America to place some tariffs, or what some will call taxes, on imports into their country. We've seen what I've done to the global economy, stock markets rattling, going through problems, and governments around the world struggling on what should be their response to the decision by President Donald Trump to actually place import tariffs on goods that are coming into his market or the American economy. Yes, you've heard from the economists, you've heard from those analysts, but how would this decision also impact on industries and manufacturing firms that are operating in Ghana, who might be adding value to some of these goods for the American market? Is it time to explore new markets? What about those who also said that, listen, there is a second round effect of this in terms of some of these raw inputs that these industries would actually be importing to aid their manufacturing? Well, how will things play out? What should be their response to this? And whether indeed there is a lot of pressure on industries, well, what will be their response? Well, we'll be getting some answers from the President of the Association of Ghana Industries, Dr. Humphrey Yimdak, who is with me here in the studio as we look at some of the challenges facing industries and how they are strategizing. Also, the recent Bank of Ghana report showed that the economy is showing some signs of recovery. Are industry and manufacturing firms really feeling this impact or not? And what about the argument by government, the directive that give priority to local manufacturing firms when it comes to making those essential purchases? Well, all these issues wrapped up on PM Express as we talk about the Trump tariff, the economy, and the state manufacturing firms in Ghana today. All of this on PM Express Business Edition. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to PM Express Business Edition. And indeed, for a lot of people, what has happened in America over the past 2 is a typical example of when America sneezes, the whole world catches cold. We've heard the economists, we've heard the analysts right here in this studio. What about industries, those who are manufacturing in Ghana? There are some of these products that they have typical value addition here in Ghana before they export to the US market. Now, there have been some uncertainties as well. And what would this mean for local industries in Ghana? What did they make of this challenge? What about government's argument that indeed they are going to push for the extension of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which allowed Ghana to export certain items to the US market duty-free and quota-free? Mr. Dr. Yimdak Humphrey is the president of the Association of Ghana. And thank you so much for joining us in studio. I mean, for you at AGOA, and even you are also, I mean, an industrialist as well, an entrepreneur. So let me start on the personal note first. I mean, for you, we knew about this, and anybody who read and they would disagree, the Project 25 and all the rest, it was just a matter of time. What do you make of this announcement by Donald Trump? First, speaking from a perspective as an entrepreneur, as a businessman, as an industrialist, who actually the US could even be a market for you, if I don't know. I mean, if it was a market for you. What do you make of this, this action by the US president?
Well, thank you, George, and good evening to your viewers. Liberation Day Declaration, you mentioned it, and its consequential issues. To me personally, it was a big surprise considering what the proponents of the free market economic theory has been over the years, and the role of the US government in pushing the clear agenda of the free market economy and tying it to related democratic governance, and the fallout of the Smooth-Howell tariff in the 1930s that led to the creation of the GATT and the WTO, bringing fairness and reasonability to the trading world and the financial world. So considering this announcement of the Liberation Day, the first thing that hit me was what was the clear intention of the president of the US? Was he seeking to dislodge the ineffectiveness of WTO, Yes, we do agree that to a large extent the WTO has some challenges that required reforms. And then those reforms over the years have been negotiated. So to the extent that the US comes out with such a position called the Liberation Day and the tariff imposition on April 2nd across board was of a big concern to the entire world. And the reaction was very obvious on the various stock markets and the trading houses. So then from there you try to drill it on to your local perspective, that then what becomes of your production line, that is if you are exporting directly to the US, or what becomes of the knock-on effect if you are presumably exporting primary products to a company in Europe or Switzerland that is exporting finished products to the US. What would be the knock-on effect all the way to your production line? And it's in two forms. When you take the primary products, i.e. cocoa, and we know cocoa is one of the products that have been touched. Though it's subject to room that there'll be some negotiations. Until then, one will say, so if you exporting raw cocoa or primary cocoa, that goes to your supply, your off-takers in Europe, and they end up their product in the US. By virtue of this tariff increase, it might affect consumption way in the US. And then what is the knock-on effect if consumption drops? Automatically, your buyers in Europe, who are most hit by virtue of the tariff, will reduce the volume of products that they are taking, and that will affect your production and then supply of your raw primary product to Europe. And then what then becomes of it if your finance minister has captured a projection for his export revenue in terms of forex? By virtue of that shortage, it will affect your budget. It goes on to knock-on effect on your fiscals. So there are knock-on effects and implications, even if you're not exporting directly to the US.
So I get from you that there are some members of yours who might be exporting first the raw material to Switzerland that could be producing more of these chocolates for the US market. Now, even I've forgotten the name of that vehicle, that manufacturer, but even just with this announcement, it was on the wires that they have halted the export of vehicles to the US because of the uncertainty. So there's a cascading effect on even the assembly and manufacturing that could last for almost about a year or 2 years. Just because of this uncertainty, they've halted more than 3,000 cars that were supposed to have gone to US. And then that MD or CEO was saying that because of that, they've even halted production as well.
That's correct.
Let's come to the Ghana situation, and I don't know what the preliminary data your members are giving to you. There are a lot of industries here, free zones, and even that are also exporting primary products to other countries in Europe that do another value addition to the US market. Has there been any notice, hold on, and all the rest because of this, or it's still early days yet?
Yes, it's still early days yet. It's an unfolding phenomenon that is coming with a lot of uncertainties that will need to be corrected as the vehicle moves on. So you could see even in the declaration on April the 2nd, the declaration was made. On April the 5th, because some goods were in transit, they gave some breather for the goods in transit. But realizing beyond that there might be further complication, they've done some 90 days also hold, so as they could smoothen the transition of goods coming in and other cut-off points. So there are real implications, and I presume the US team themselves have come to the awareness that, look, if they need to really roll out this, it must be staggered in a way such that goods in transit and production lines. That's why if I'm in a production space seeking that I'm exporting to the US and these are the uncertainties, first thing is to halt. You save your costs, you save your capital, and wait and see what the ramifications will be. You seek to, and what we are currently doing is that, considering that it's an unfolding event, we're projecting and then speaking to counterparts in the various states that have been hit. What are they stimulating? What are the scenarios that are coming onto the table for effective decision making, whether to kick on production or to hold on? There are advantages and disadvantages here. We shouldn't rule it out. So to some countries, okay, and then in a couple of meetings that we held even today in the trade ministry, some school of thought see it as an opportunity. All right, and a clear example they gave is the case of Ghana and Ivory Coast. And given that Ivory Coast is doing about 14+% and Ghana doing about 10%, they see that as an opportunity to do more of the export. But I said there are consequential issues in there. The determinant of the rate, bear in mind there was a formula that was also captured to that effect. Looking at the formula carefully, it says total export less total import over total export. That determines your percentage. If you go for the advantage, i.e., and Lesotho, or take another country, Vietnam, who are above the 25% mark, decide to say we relocate to Ghana because we want to export because Ghana is cheaper, it is the formula that determines it. If that goes into the future, and that becomes, you increase your, what you call your export revenue, will that formula be triggered? That is why we go back to the position I stated earlier. It distorts the free market economic theory, where we have what we call the most favored nation principles, and then it's triggering the non-discriminatory trade practices. So consider that this formula is what they're using. If I vary and I might see what you call GIPC goes to woe in investors from Lesotho, and gradually my exports under the 10% quota increases. What becomes of us in the future? Will the same formula be applied? What is the rules that are governing this every now and then? So it goes back to the fundamental of the free market economic theory that the WTO sought to promote. And then that is where the concern is, because the principle is being violated.
Dr. Decker, I still want to come back again that for that local firm here in Ghana, who might not be directly exporting to US, but through other European markets.
Yes.
What could be the impact of this uncertainty on that firm out there? One and explaining to me the challenges that comes if that hash or that chocolate firm in maybe UK or Switzerland are saying that, hold on, what are the cascading impact of this
back
on that local manufacturing firm?
It goes all the way to the farmer, just not only to the local company that is doing the cocoa processing. I don't want to mention company names. We have a number of our colleagues doing processing and exporting the liquor and others, and through the cocoa board, exporting the beans. Granted, that is the case that Company X in Ghana or Company P in Ghana is exporting to Switzerland, and then Swiss now has about 30+% tariff increase. Automatically, there will be market contraction in the US where the final product lands. The concern is that what is going to be the consumer behavior? Are they still going to purchase the product anyway? Bear in mind, by virtue of that 34% or 36% increase, it will drive an inflationary issue in the US. Will the disposable income from the consumer in the US still be stable to go for chocolate? Granted that all things be equal, that the consumer behavior still stands, then the production and the value chain from the primary stage in Ghana, from the farmer to the processor, through the company in Swiss, back will not change. That's all things be equal. But we know the consumer behavior over the period changes as a result of inflation and as a result of your disposable income. That becomes a concern and trickles back. So once the demand contracts, there's contraction in the demand, automatically it comes back to the production base, which is Ghana. And bear in mind then, there are complications in Ghana. You have job constraints, because if the demand has dropped, revenue has dropped, it could affect even the country's forex. And it has forex implication. It could lead to forex uncertainties. So there are events
so job are at risk here.
Oh, job at risk,
production being cut is at risk.
That's on the micro level, which are company. But on the macro level also, export remittances that comes to the country is also at risk. And
also it trickles down even to the farmer as well.
It trickles all the way to the farmer, infrastructure, social interventions. You've got to look at it broadly across the value chain.
I know this engagement has been behind the scenes, but not going into fine details. What is government telling you?
Before we get to government, it's good to also place this on the, and I thought to use the Smoot-Hawley's tariff in the 1930s. When you go in there and you look at the consequential effects of this, the tariff increase then the globalization subject matter wasn't that integrated as it is today. So if today it is that integrated, if this is not managed well, the knock-on effect can be massive. And therefore, we pray that decision makers, as it unfolds, should look into history and then do a bit of predictive analysis into the years to see how this can be managed. Because there are other inputs that come in. Because if you use the chocolate, finished chocolate as an example, in there you might see other companies supplying sugar. You might see other companies supplying packaging materials. You might see other companies supplying milk to complete the final product. Where are the sources that come together to form this? So there are knock-on effects in the value chain that must be analyzed properly. Back to the question.
What is government telling you? What is government
All right, so we held
to deal with this uncertainty and disruptions?
One school of thought said, don't panic, we'll engage. So we engaged today at the Ministry of Trade. We had representatives from a number of institutions. There was a comforting position where everybody was optimistic that, yes, can we look at it on the other angle? What are the opportunities that we can derive out of this? Yes, there are opportunities. And then I'll give you another clear example of this. And that is currently playing out. There are opportunities that if we could harness, and they are potential opportunities. The potential, since the days of Kwame Nkrumah till date, has always been existing. Converting the potential to actuals are the real issues. So a clear case is what ECG is doing. So in an ECG contest, we have a number of companies producing cables, producing conductors, and by virtue of the ECG initiative, we instituted an LI to aid buying local content.
I
want to give you a practical example of it.
I'll come to the issue, but when you hear government saying that don't panic, we are going to negotiate.
Yes.
The US is not even listening to Canada, an ally.
That's correct.
There are goods that are in transit as we speak right now.
Yes.
There are manufacturing firms that are now sourcing their raw inputs from the farm gates to produce, not even directly to America, to their secondary firms in Europe to add value again for the US market. The reality is that there is so much uncertainty.
Absolutely.
When government tells you that do not panic, how do you connect the dots that a country like Canada is even struggling to convince the US? A country like UK is struggling to. The reality is that talking about opportunities, some will say, is a moot argument.
Well, the role of government in a particular case like this, and this came as a surprise, I mean, though we saw it on the signs, because he displayed it in his first tenure as a president, and the second year he seeks to enforce it, and we presume that he has thought through this significantly. Of course, in situations like that, you need to find a way to calm the waters whilst you deploy all your political arsenals and other related interventions to hold on the shock. So yes, don't be surprised, government, you say don't panic. We'll go back to the table and negotiate on AGOA. We'll go back to the table and take advantage of the freeze to renegotiate the terms. Fortunately for Ghana, if you look at it directly between Ghana and the US, the exports volumes are not so significant. As much as they are reasonably good, it gives us some shock. That which is huge, which is the oils, are not being touched. That's the finished crude oil is not being touched. So it's cocoa, yam, apparels, and the artifacts that are really direct that you can see on the Ghanaian market. But in the cocoa, so you see a lot of them going through Europe and then landing back in the US. So what do you do in such a circumstances as a micro, as an individual company? You need to speak to your suppliers or your off-takers, all right? And then if for no reason over the period you have exploited the diversification of your market, you need to take charge of your enterprise first. Whilst there's the bigger picture where it comes to the government or the country to be analyzed. So the unfolding events are pretty early. There's a lot of uncertainties as we roll out. The 90-day pause gives us all a bit of break to do more engaging to see what will be the best situation going forward.
Mr. Daka, and I asked this thing about the posturing and the actions. That are you convinced by some of the actions that government is taking that there are some precedents, and not to say that who are even flying all the way to US to try and engage Donald Trump, you know, are we signaling our trade representative in Washington, D.C., our ambassador, to try and engage the Commerce Secretary and all those things? Have you heard some of all these things? Because I have this question about goods that are in transit and all the rest. And these manufacturing firms have gone for loans on commercial banks. They've had workers on contract. Even the uncertainty alone is enough to collapse some manufacturing firms in terms of what to do or not to do. So if government comes in and tells you that do not panic, have you seen them taking those practical steps?
All right.
Our ambassador is engaging the Commerce Secretary. These are the lines that are coming, diplomatic lines that are coming in. The U.S. ambassador in Ghana is giving all this in to give you that comfort that, listen, there is no need to panic.
Yeah. So the first step was when we engaged the trade minister. And the second step was that the trade minister and the foreign affairs minister engaged the U.S. ambassador, showing a concern and engaging and seeking the next steps. Beyond that, we haven't gotten any concrete communication as to whether they are engaging the U.S. commercial sector in Washington direct. That we don't know. We know in April, there's a World Bank meeting and a spring meeting. Presumably, they might take up those engagements. So to the best of my knowledge, this is how far I know they have engaged. And then beyond that, I do not know. Secondly, regarding the posturing of government, we had a meeting with the Minister of Trade today. And then there we had a significant representation assuring us and then emphasizing the further engagement they seek to have with the U.S. government. That's the best that I can tell you.
Are you confident by these posturing of government? So you do that. Give you some comfort to talk to your suppliers, to talk to your other chain, the contract workers that, listen, do not panic. We believe in what government is saying. There wouldn't be any serious disruptions to our supply lines.
To the extent of the assurance, you need to also internalize it and look at the risk element as an entity. The general broad assurance is there, but you know there are some externalities or external factors when they befall a nation, no matter the assurance from the president, because they are external factors and mostly they are beyond your control. That's why you call it external factors. This is one clear case of an external factor. How do you manage it? How do you mitigate it? Okay, and that is where I said to you, exiting the meeting today through my reps, there was this optimistic assurance that, look, we can recalibrate and restructure economy to take advantage of it. Yes, it is possible. The case of COVID showed us one clear example. However, how did we execute the fallout of COVID? And how did we deliberately promote local manufacturing companies as a fallout out of the COVID? That example is there. How many companies can you count out beyond that? So that should then tell you that, yeah, that exit plan and that said assurance is not sufficient. Because there are other obstacles, all right, in these structural reforms to build internal capacity to take advantage. And I was seeking to give you a clear example where we even have a local content law and seeking to build a value chain in the, what you call power industry, so that manufacturers could produce cables and conductors, and to the extent that ECG was so cooperative to encourage meter assembling plants and then to come to Ghana to take advantage of the local content. But beyond that, then you need to go interrogate how far has it been successful over the years. As a clear case of a situation that we seek to bring reforms to, execute it to take advantage. So we are concerned with this rhetoric that yes, it is okay. We can recalibrate our system and take advantage of it. With COVID, we couldn't take advantage of the situation to industrialize. We still are still deindustrialization. Import is still huge. The structure of the economy is still highly dominant with import. So if COVID couldn't give us that reawakening to correct issues, and we could see such mistakes still are reoccurring, what is the probability that we could take our destiny into our hands even with this Liberation Day declaration? That's food for thought that we need to do.
Dr. Dake, what would you tell those who would argue that maybe some of your members, Association of Ghana Industries, may have brought this challenge onto themselves? Now, yes, U.S. market was a cheap source. You know, the Ghana Export Promotion Authority data suggests that in 2023, I mean, just Gary exports alone fetched us $1.4 million. That's a lot of money. You didn't explore the African market. Now, this uncertainty has come in. The market in Africa is big. The market in Africa is huge. if you were deliberate in exploring the African market, maybe you could have weathered the shocks, because there are some who would argue in trying to play down this is nothing, but there are a lot of manufacturing firms here who are also exporting to Europe for repackaging to the US market. So it is not even just about that person directly exporting to the US market. If you have explored the African market, which is so huge,
yes,
you might have been smiling when the challenge came.
Yeah, so it's easier said than done. I got colleagues that are exporting yam, and yam to the US market is significant. But what is the market segment and the culture or the cultural behavior towards yam US? Because on the part of the northern belt of the US and the Jamaicans believe in the roots, the tubers. So there is a significant market there, and then the Black American community. So you segment your market and do your market risk analysis as against Europe. So if you see the traffic of yam, significantly we import a lot to the US because there's a market.
I mean, if Gary in 2003,
besides the culture and the behavior of the consumer, the next stage is to look at logistics and then transportation related issues, and then the payment systems. To the African continent that you say we didn't take advantage of, largely the challenge of transportation between intra-African trade, logistical issues are a big issue. Thirdly, payment system between our neighboring countries and traders in our country is another significant one. So if you take these two out of many, there are clear issues. If you seek to transport, and a colleague who is into salt mining will tell me, if I'm transporting salt between Tema and Rwanda, a supplier, it's pretty expensive because the shipping vessel, the logistics to transport that is a big issue. So we have logistical issues that collectively as an ECOWAS bloc or the African bloc we need to solve. These infrastructure related issues, power, transportation, the train rail systems have been well developed in the European countries in the West. It makes it easy to fly what you call a pineapple from Ghana easily to Netherlands. As against from here going to Lesotho or down to what you call Chad. So logistical issues are constrained.
It's quite expensive to operate in Africa, and that
so
makes it
those are the hindrances.
And most of your members to export to these markets.
Absolutely. And there are other non-tariff barriers that we haven't discussed beyond the logistics and payment systems.
Let's talk about AGOA.
Yes.
And government is saying that they are going to, because one of the safest that, or the relief that came for a lot of people was that, oh, there is AGOA, so we might be excused from this.
Yeah.
It appears that as we speak right now, that is also out of the roof. There is no AGOA, and there's not even a space for you to talk about the fact that ending September before maybe something will happen. Yeah. Government is saying that they're also going back to the US government to try and renegotiate for an extension of AGOA.
Well, it's our prayer that the optimistic position of government to renegotiate AGOA comes to being. We have a number of apparel factories now that are producing, and then
there's one in Accra Central.
There's one in Accra. There's one in somewhere in the eastern region. A couple of another one somewhere in the Achim area coming up. There are a number of them coming up, and they're taking advantage of this, and they employ a lot of people. Fortunately, it's going to 10%. But if you compare this with Lesotho or compare that, Kenya it seems has the same rate as Ghana. And if you compare, you may see a bit of comparative issues in there. But the question is, the AGOA was underpinned under the free market economic theory or dynamics. That's why I say the free market economic dynamics, by virtue of this Liberation Day declaration, has thrown it out of the books. So therefore, they couldn't keep AGOA whilst this policy is being tabled in virtue of the most favored nations treaty or using the non-discriminatory trade practices, because it leads to arbitrariness, it leads to protectionism. And this is what we can deduce from what is unfolding. And I then go forward to tell you that there's a formula to computing the rate, the total export less the total import over the total export. So even if it varies, that Lesotho is doing 32%. All right, and then he says, so by virtue of that, of Vietnam. So let's relocate these factories to Ghana. And into the future, medium term, they realize that the Ghana export is also seeding that. What becomes of it? What rule is governing this? The WTO rule over the period had governed trade. This particular Liberation Day celebration has distorted it and is of concern to the entire trading community.
I know some of your members who are into serious export, have taken some huge pieces of credit from the banks locally and even outside as well.
Yes.
At the association level, and maybe these were private discussions, has there been any discussion between the association and even the banks that, see, we need some relief or whatever stay of certain thing because of the uncertainty alone? When the month is due or the quarter is due, we are supposed to make some payments. Our goods are still locked up in the warehouse because of what is happening.
Yeah.
Has there been any discussions with the banks because of what is happening?
So when they say the financial market has gone through shock and has gone through the wave of this announcement, these are part of the implications. Because you have locked-in contracts, you have forward sales, and some have financial obligations which are bridge financing to products that you have promised and you have a contract on. So with this, perhaps your profit is 10%. Now this is being soaked away by a tariff increase. Of course, there'll be concern to the producer, there'll be concern to the banker, because once he knows he's that exposed, then there's a cause for concern.
But have you studied anything at association level?
Well, the events are still playing out. Let's not be sending out statements that might bring ripples into the system. So it's still an unfolding event. We are studying it and the dynamism of the events. But for the 90 days pause, we would have been in a higher anxiety. Okay, but for now, we are now taking opportunity to consult, engaging government, engaging our counterparts, look at the regional bloc. That is why when you keep asking the question, what is Ghana doing? At this stage, it will be useful that the country does some form of collective engagement. We have concern how...
But to what end, Doc?
To what end? Of course, the finance minister knows that if he doesn't get it right, he'll have a tough time balancing his books, getting his revenue, getting domestic revenue, which is largely based upon imports. And if you look into the domestic revenue mobilization, significant of about 50+%, as at the last check, just about 50 comes from the ports. And these are largely imports. And then from export as well, which are from the cocoa. Unfortunately, we know we had a cocoa drop by virtue of the events of the galamsey and the cocoa export. Leave that of the crude oil aside. So government has a big concern to put his head on the line to make sure he gets some certainty in the cocoa market and the exports.
Are you quite worried about the uncertainty and the impact on fiscals and revenue as well?
Oh yes, because it has a ripple effect on that macro. And then from there, if you are not getting enough domestic, the BOG will slap more monetary policies on us. And it will trigger the policy rate, lending rate, and the cycle continues. And it has a consequential effect on the US dollar as well, which is a medium of trading. So we are very concerned. You cannot look at this in isolation. That is why we are also concerned about the disparity between the tariff on Ghana and Ivory Coast, where we are together seeking to harmonize our total cocoa export and the benefits to the farmers. Now we're doing 10, they are doing 14. So what will be the impact on our trade when we think that, we have a 10%, it's good for us. Look, once today you are happy, the next time it will all catch up with you. So we need to be concerned looking at the macro picture and the micro picture.
But you're worried about the impact on revenue and all them for
definitely
for the FX as well, for inflation as well.
Yes, because if the other one you need to look at is the remittances. Remittances has become part of our inflows. And if the inflationary rate hits the US by virtue of the tariffs and the cocoa or chocolate or other products that are going into US and the consumers disposable income is reduced by virtue of the inflation in the US, how much remittances will come to your family, and that will affect governments.
There are some who have argued that just like the premium cocoa argument, and those days when I was in London, I know that I would still go to the African market to get the yam and the puna and all the rest, and because of the taste, if you try and get the roots from the Americas and the Caribbean, they're still not taste that good compared to what is coming from Ghana. There are some who have argued that the preference for these roots tubers coming from Ghana compared to those coming from Mexico and the Caribbeans, it could still be a trump card for us, no matter how expensive. I have moved across states to go and get the food in a Ghanaian shop before, in a restaurant. Do you think that that argument plays well here, just like the premium cocoa argument, that all these things could play in an advantage, that no matter how expensive these commodities are, people will still go to that shop? So if Gary got us $1.4 million in 2023 just to America, this is not even Europe.
Yes. So that goes back to the consumer behavior dynamics. So out of the premium cocoa, I buy it 5 times a week, and then I have the disposable income to pick it up. And then here lies the case, all of a sudden, if I buy it at 5 cities, now it's now 7 cities. It's into my disposable income by virtue of inflation and the tariffs that have been slapped. And the final consumer on the American market might not buy 5 times a week, he might buy 3 times a week. So what happens to demand? The demand is slashed by 2, correct? Yeah. So he still buys it, but he will not buy it 5 times. So the demand automatically then trickles backwards to the production line. So yes, so it's a consumer behavior issue tied up with inflation, tied up with the disposable income that comes in there. So yes, there's consumer behavior theory that you need to study and underpin that assumption that because the taste is good, irrespective of whatever the case is, the guys will still go out there and buy. The disposable income become the determining factor, which is underpinned by inflation, and those are the dynamics that will come in as a consumer.
I engage a lot of people and some friends of mine, and with all these things that are happening, they're asking me, George, where's the African Free Trade Continental Deal? I'm already describing as a disappointment, because what has happened to that? Well, in the scope of what is happening right now, AFTA should have been our savior, should have been the go-to zone and area to absorb the shocks.
That's correct. So the AFTA is on course, irrespective of a few obstacles. One of the biggest...
You describe them as few.
Well, what would you say better than that? Well, one has to do with the certificate of origin related issues, the payment systems that has been improved on, and we discussed the payment systems, the logistics and the transportation hubs that could do the intraplay. And there is the custom harmonization code to make sure that the categories, category 3, 7, and the others, in terms of percentages, are harmonized, the products are selected, and then the subject matter of capacity to produce and distribute among the intra-African trade. The other concern, which is the capacity, is what colleagues are now saying, that how do we take advantage and build our internal capacity and proceed with our diversification. In Ghana, yes, so the current 24-hour economy becomes one of the policies that must be tied into this, to deliberately build internal capacity. And I also did say, there are some existing capacity. How do you consciously use that vehicle? And that's why we're excited about the finance minister's position, that for you to, the Made in Ghana agenda.
The essential goods.
The essential goods
locally.
Go locally. That is
what
the
do you
first
make
step.
of that?
That is the first step.
Some will say that this is not the first time we've heard this.
Thank you. That's the next step we go to. So the first
how are you
declaration.
moving to let him actualize this directive that for all the ministry, department, and agencies, when it comes to the purchase of essential goods, look within locally, the manufacturing firms.
The manufacturing, not, you see, because there's distinction.
Okay.
There collects
help us, not the assembling firms.
No, assembly is another, that's another import substitution. So it's another stage of it, okay? And then there are those who bring in finished goods. And one typical example, we met the finance minister, had to do with the diapers. No, sanitary pads. Okay, so government seeks to do a sanitary pad project and distribution of sanitary pads. So we asked, there are about 4 or 5 companies in Ghana. How do you consciously use them as one of the examples to demonstrate the essential product? Same for the textbook printing through the Ministry of Education. There's a budget allocated for that. Same as the cable manufacturers and the metering assembling plants to ECG, NETCO, and the Enclave Power and the rest. There are examples that we want to see government deliberately and consciously holding their hands, pulling the integrated line. If you did that of the cables and the conductors, that becomes another firm integration that works into VALCO. VALCO then all the way to the bauxite integrated line. You must be conscious about it. So what is exciting when we engage the minister, aside that declaration and meeting his directors, he seeks to amend the PPA Act, right? The Public Procurement Act. Part of our engagement with him is to make it a condition that made in Ghana goods should be the first priority for any procurement in Ghana. You are using our local funds to purchase it. Let the amendment reflect that, that shows concern and good intentions to be implemented.
And that is yet to be done.
That is yet to be done. I guess the process is on. So make it one of the conditions of made in Ghana. Then you are adding action to your intention. Secondly, on the same issue of the tariffs, we and the PRC, we said to PRC, you determine the rates for the utility agencies, including ECG. Our proposal to use that as you do stimulation of their pricing and the investment, make it a condition to demonstrate local purchase made in Ghana goods that goes through ECG, NEDCO, and the entire utilities. We want to be deliberate about it. So for us to use the Ghanaian hard currency to pay your tariffs, buy made in Ghana, because we create jobs and then the taxes are coming back to Ghana, as against just importing all cables whilst there's capacity here.
There's been an issue also about the ability to supply.
Yes.
The capacity.
That's correct.
It cuts across from the small to the medium size to the large scale as well. How do you respond to this charge that whilst government and even other industries or even other companies are committed to the made in Ghana charge or live within first, there have been several instances where your members have failed to deliver on time?
No. So we aren't in any way suggesting that don't import. The first priority, if I give the examples I've given, exhaust the local market. Demonstrate that you've exhausted the local market.
That you can also meet the capacity to supply.
Absolutely. Either you can or you gave the opportunity to the local companies
and they failed.
Demonstrate. That's why I use the word. If it's with PRC, demonstrate it. If it's with PPA, demonstrate it. If it's to whichever the ministries, get it demonstrated. But let me give you an example. In the case of in the past government, when the subject matter of the school feeding program, where sometimes along the line, rice that had to be used to feed the process could be purchased locally. There are artificial systems that are created. How do you do the monitoring to be sure that the local companies or the local farmers don't have capacity to do that? All right? And if you use only price as a factor, I had one of my colleagues who was into the rice aggregation and milling. Complaint is that the local rice is expensive more than the imported rice. And I said, do you know how long the imported rice had been stored? Which we call in the accounting FIFO, LIFO. Yeah. First in, first out. You might be having a rice from Thailand, which has been stored for the last 5 to 10 years, as against a fresh rice that has been produced from the farm gate, which will be expensive, which is most nutritious. So we've got to look at all those parameters. And the role of the regulator, either Food and Drugs Board, Standards Authority, Energy Commission, all the regulators must step up their game in terms of regulation to make sure what comes through the ports meets the standard.
But the assurance is that you would up your game to meet the request in terms of supply.
Look, we are men and entrepreneurs looking for opportunity to maximize returns on
that is the assurance.
Of course, why not?
Let's talk about the economy. I mean, the Ghana cedi has been fairly stable. Excited about that, and you think that the Bank of Ghana should stay on that course? Because I know that AG has always complained that the uncertainties, you hate it, you can't stand it because it affects planning. At least we have seen some fair stability over the past 1 month or even 2 months. Good for your members?
Oh, yes. I mean, that's why we always excited when the fundamentals are being monitored and being managed properly. And sometimes, unfortunately, when we are left to do it all by ourselves, it becomes scandalous issues. And considering that the IMF is also playing a role, we could see a demonstrable cut in expenditure. As much as that is affecting productivity, it has a consumption element. But once we all know we go under the IMF as a result of our own deeds, then comes in austerity, and then comes in a tough management. This amidst The debt structuring that was done over the period, the obligations are not trickling heavily now, and therefore it's all part of the reason why we could see that there's some reasonable stability, expenditure cut.
But how has been that stability on the impact on your operations? Because in production, and even there are some who are even pushing that if things are stable, if the city is stable, why are we seeing some semblance or some spike in price of some products on the market?
So there's also another flip side of it as you seek to manage the austerity. It has, and then you realize that the BOG also deploys its monetary tools and then sucks the excess. So liquidity position, what is the fluidity of the liquidity position in the system? That then also determines the purchases, all right? And then it has also implication. So as you seek to do stability, you got to juggle the stability and growth. And you could see this particular budget sought to focus on stability, to stabilize that which they have inherited. And mixing the stability period and growth is dicey because you have a lot of moving poles. There are a lot of concerns coming up about misappropriation here and there. They have perceptional issues that affect the market in terms of those related misappropriation or misapplication of funds. So it's still early days yet. We are not yet 6 months in the new government. So let's see how it plays out.
It's early days for people to say that because we've seen the city being fairly stable and fuel prices being fairly stable, tariffs are being fairly stable, we should see that in the impact on the price of the goods that are purchased from your end?
No, and that is why I say it's still early days because you could see there are a lot of moving poles now. Beyond the 3 months, the IMF's conditionalities are being triggered. Have you met them? Because government seeks funding to continue on the program. We did hear that government will seek to engage further. Have they met all the conditions precedent? If they have, then we could see, we can predict. But I presume there are still some in the pipeline that they need to meet.
3 months of stability of city is not enough to push for.
Because
who are saying that let's see that in the pricing of your good rather than it going up.
Because there are pass-through effects
6 months of fuel prices being fairly stable.
Because
why consumer be not being compensated
beyond the
for
fuel pricing, there are tariff-related issues that are still part of the CPs that might come. There are, and those are pass-through effects of inflation, and government needs to predict, and the BOG needs to predict ahead of time how to contain the inflationary pass-through by virtue of a tariff increase. We saw the minimum wage that was negotiated. They've contained it till date. So it's still early days yet. There are externalities, just like we just seen what is happening on the tariff front. What is going to be the impact for import and export in terms of the expectation within the budget. So it's still a bit early, first 3 months, to predict that what we've seen will run throughout the year. It's still a bit.
I mean, there are some who are saying that COVID taught our lessons. Do you think that industries, manufacturing firms are more prepared now for the first and second round shocks of these tariffs? Or again, we'll sit down and see just like the Russian-Ukraine war and now the US tariffs, that is why the economy is going this way. Are you guys more prepared now for the uncertainties and the shocks post-COVID-19? And some are even describing this tariff thing as the next COVID if things are still not handled well.
Well, see, to the extent that the structure of the economy is still highly dependent on imports, then there are challenges in there. Irrespective of the COVID, that's why I said how many entities manage to win themselves largely from the shocks of the disruption and are more domestically focused in terms of their raw material base. Yeah, there are some companies I can mention that are highly 90% raw material based, 70% raw material base. So they've learned strongly out of that and re-diversify to get it. But would you say that forms about 30% of your production base or the GDP of the economy? No. And if you look into the agriculture space, and if it's still trending, that the most significant inflationary index is agriculture and it's food, then it tells you that we're still not out of the wood post-COVID. Because if we are taking significant lessons out of that, and with all the interventions we did of PFJ1, PFJ2, and all those interventions we sought to do to reverse the post-COVID concern, and still today we still have high inflation as a result of food, there's still a little more work to do.
Again, I asked about the 3 months argument, and some would say that some would look at 100 days. I mean, in terms of how they've managed the economy, the budget issues, the commitment to fiscal prudence and all the rest, at the manufacturing level and industries, how would you describe the first 3 months of the year, i.e. this new administration, the engagement, the commitment, the support that they've committed that they're going to do? How would you describe the first 3 months of the year?
So what we do in AGI is we have what we call the Business Barometer Report.
Yeah.
So it is not Dr. Dake's opinion. We conduct a research and a very robust one.
Is not in yet.
Yeah, so why don't you wait for it?
But I'm saying that, early this year, 3 months might be enough to make a judgment that, okay, the prospects are exciting, the prospects are interesting. They've shown some signs of commitment. We hope that they stick to those commitments going forward.
Yes, to the extent that of my conversations with a few colleagues, you could see that there are some decisions that are resonating well with the business community. However, it is good you back it with a scientific research. And that is what I'm suggesting to you, that we have conducted it. In a couple of days. We'll let you see it and see what's the entire business community or the database that we're using to do this.
Preliminary, so far, so interesting, some will say.
Oh, so far you could see the stability, and it is being demonstrated in the, the confidence level. And it's, if a president promised that I will appoint 60 ministers, and he sticks to it, he sends a signal, correct?
Yeah.
And if he goes ahead and then...
He levies off?
Thank you. So, and he goes on for e-levy, irrespective of the consent, he takes it up. Even though the crucial deal on the table was the VAT, he comes back to the table and assures you that, yes, we know it's a case. We demonstrated understanding how the cascading effect is affecting and distorting your tax element. Give me 6 months, I'll be back to it. You engage him, it says, yes, that was the situation. I've inherited it. I'm computing it and seeking to balance it between my IMF obligation and my debt obligation. I'll do it. We know the situation. So it's a chicken and egg situation. And then that's why we are conducting research, look at other parameters beyond the rhetoric and what they've demonstrated.
We are still in the fourth review discussions is currently ongoing with the IMF.
Yes.
I mean, for you, what are your expectations going forward that will end with us having a staff level agreement for us to get some waivers and pass this because of the impact on the larger economy at industry level?
Yeah, so those are the information that we have here to the ground to see whether there are spillovers, whether they've derailed significantly. The extent of derail will also give you confidence or not. Okay, so that's why our quarter report is not out yet, because we need to stimulate all those major decisions in the engine room that we don't know, but through the IMF and the reports that will come out, that will give us a clearer picture of the liabilities and the debt position and how they managing those ones. I heard one of the stories how they're seeking to put some reserves for the energy sector to show the payment of the energy bills, which is also one of the significant debt positions that we need to manage. It's assuring, but until we really see it out, we will not comment on it.
So, Daka, as you try and wrap up on this discussion, still on the tariff issue, for you, what should be the way forward in terms of government posturing?
On the tariff review, we strongly believe...
On the import tariffs, I'm talking about.
Yes, on the US, the Liberation Days, I think it's still unfolding. We should have a lot of consultation from both internal and external parties using the ECOWAS bloc and the AU bloc and the AU bloc. And then so as we could understand and also assess our domestic strength, what is doable. I've given about 3 or 4 low-hanging interventions that with a directive, just as the minister did, and implementation, you could start developing your internal strengths on some fronts. Whilst that is happening, negotiations and studying the unfolding events of this Liberation Days declaration. It's pretty important.
Let's come to the Ghanaian economy as well. What are your expectations in the next 3 months of the year? You know, we are getting to mid-year review. There's government commitment that they will take off the COVID-19 levy, looking at how the negotiation the IMF goes and all the rest. What are your expectations in the next half of the year and even going forward for manufacturing firms?
Yes, our highest expectation in the mid-year review will be the VAT. They promised that they will constitute a technical team with the IMF. We want to see an update on that, whether that team has been constituted and whether there are actions in that direction, because that is one of the being of our concerns. We do not want the case by mid-year, then they bring us the team that this is the team. We want to see the team inaugurated between now and before the mid-year review. That is crucial. That then determines what the IMF also says on the fourth review. We want to see what the directions are regarding that and what the critical decisions on the energy sector, because that is one of the derailing sectors, if we do not manage, can really plunge us back into real difficulties. That's correct. And then the last one then has to do with the gold board, because that's one of the initiatives to bring about the stability of the USD. Yeah, so we want to see how that is shaping up, the seed fund that is being given to them. I'm told the law has been passed, correct?
Yeah.
As the president
signed.
Okay, great, sure. So we want to see how that is being deployed, so that together it's a critical issue in managing our forex. Amidst the old remittances and the export issues. Now the export has also been touched by virtue of the tariff issues. So how will this also affect the remittances bit of it? So we need engagement on all this as we go forward.
As I end the show, I mean, how has the engagement been between manufacturing firms and the Ghana Revenue Authority? I knew that in the past some members have complained about they not being business friendly. Has the posturing changed, or it is still the same?
Yeah, we had an engagement with the new Commissioner General.
Anthony Sapon.
Fortunately, we used to double with him in private sector before he moved before he moved into the new role, and a lot of assurances. But there's one more thing that we need to look at. To them, compliance, they seek to step up compliance to the next level. And therefore, colleagues will see a lot of demand notice, audit processes happening. We need to support them. When you have difficulties, come over through the association or get to the ministry and engage. And I believe they have a friendly posture as compared to time ago when there was a bit of harassment. Colleagues also complained about the retail outlets where we had officers sitting in the various retail shops and factories collecting VAT. Our proposal is that there are a lot of IT solutions, deploy IT solutions to collect the VAT, which is not performing accordingly, because there's a lot of money to collect from the VAT space.
You think that the challenge can be solved if there's more collaboration between the Association of Ghana Industries and the Ghana Revenue Authority?
Regarding innovation, because we have members that have capacity, they seek to demonstrate this capacity. Regarding interpersonal relationship, where we can use peer pressure to engage members who are going off the tenets and ethos of the GRA and the company's relationship. We believe we can be helpful in that cause to support our colleagues attain their targets.
I know the debate will still go on in your homes and offices about whether a lot more can be done to ensure that Ghanaian industries weather the storms and the shocks that will come, or that is coming with Donald Trump's import tariffs and how they're already causing a lot of waves and a lot of economies out there. Well, we've done our part. Let's see what government is going to do and how things unfold in the coming day. This has been PM Express Business Edition. My name is George Yafe. Have a great day.